.710 KURV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, home of the Iron Microphone, streaming live on KURV.com. We are the only broadcast in the United States that I know of that deals with scientific conservatism, in which the basis of conservative thought, which is individual liberty, freedom, and independence, is scientifically based. In other words, we have the facts to back up our assertions. Too much of what goes on today is blather in the media, political thought, system of education, in which opinions are based upon simply emotions without any factual context behind them. We believe that there is such a thing as good and evil, right and wrong, and that they can be ferreted out if one looks for them. We teach the choir how to sing. Others preach to the choir. We instruct in how to deal with the rantings and ravings of the emotional statists that essentially lie to us on a daily basis. We must understand that almost everything we hear in the media have learned in the system of education and is told to us by the government outside of scientific fact is a lie. And they do that for one purpose alone, to keep the government in power by convincing us that government is benevolent. In the Middle Ages, the taxes existed and the armies existed, which were paid by the taxes to oppress the population and to keep the aristocracy in power, who lived off the work of the subjects of the realm. The subjects were told that the king, by divine right, was given the obligation and duty to determine the lives of the subjects of a nation. The army was there to make sure that that was the case. If you were not born an aristocrat, you could never become an aristocrat, and the aristocracy was meant to be permanently in place, so that those yet to be born to the king and queen and duke and count were going to be the rulers over the children yet to be born of the citizens of that nation. And the amazing thing is how many people were indoctrinated to believe that that was the way things were meant to be. It is no different in our country today. We have an aristocratic class which believes itself to be born into the right of determining the lives of other people. They no longer call themselves kings, they call themselves presidents. They no longer call themselves the aristocracy, they call themselves senators and congressmen. They no longer call themselves the church, they call themselves the court. And the reason to tax is twofold. One is to feed the government, and two is to impoverish the people so that they cannot in any way have the means to compete against the government. If we look at things today, all the answers are there if we choose to see them, which we don't. Here's an example. The Supreme Court, which today consists of 9 members, 6 of those trained at Harvard Law School, 3 of those 9 trained at Yale Law School. Does that sound fair to you? How well do you think they represent the interests of Middle America? Nobody from the University of Kansas, nobody from the University of Illinois, nobody trained in Texas, nobody trained in Alabama or Florida, nobody trained in Nebraska, not even anyone trained in California. And it doesn't stop there. All of these insider dealers, such as John Corzine, Timothy Geithner, Larry Summers, and all the rest, whose incompetent decision-making has bankrupted the nation, all those ignorant and arrogant individuals who consider themselves elitist and born with the right to dictate to us how to manage our lives. If you want to apply to a position in a big shot law firm or some other big shot industry, and you graduate from the University of Kansas or the University of Montana or anything like that, do not bother to apply. It's all networking among a small group of individuals who keep the power to themselves and pretend that they know what they're doing. The reason the nation is bankrupt, the reason the nation has soldiers in 140 countries of the world, is because these individuals think they know better and can dictate to us what our lives, what we ought to do in our daily life. The Supreme Court is considered to be, in this nation today, the ultimate authority as to constitutional interpretation. That is not the way the Constitution was arranged. The Constitution was constructed to have not a hierarchical mechanism of law giving, but a circular. In other words, it didn't go from one to the other as a pyramid, but it was supposed to be a circle in which every entity could be blocked by another entity. For example, the legislative process includes the President of the United States and the two houses of Congress. Each house of Congress could be blocked by the other house of Congress because whatever law was to be passed had to be agreed upon by both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House. Therefore, the Senate could block the House could block the Senate. If the House and Senate came together on the bill, the President could veto the bill if he opposed it, thereby blocking the entire Congress. Checks and balances by blocking the entire Congress. However, the House and Senate could override the veto, but it required a 2/3 majority in each of the houses. The Supreme Court could be allowed to interpret the law or not. There's a stipulation in the Constitution in which the Congress, if it so chose or chooses, could say the Supreme Court does not have any overview of the law, so the Supreme Court can be blocked. The Supreme Court's makeup is determined not by the Supreme Court, but by the Congress. The makeup of the federal court system and the actual number of individuals on the Supreme Court, because it is not fixed in the Constitution, could be determined and has been determined by the Congress, because the Supreme Court has varied between 6 and 10 members in its time of existence. It has not been the 9 members that most of us believe has been permanent and have been led to believe is permanent. It has not been the case at all. There is no set number in the Constitution for the number of justices on the Supreme Court, which is further evidence that the Supreme Court was never meant to be the final interpreter of the law. And so we have a system of checks and balances which was purposely put into the Constitution to prevent any one branch from dominating either of the others. But that has all been tossed aside through decisions, through law, not to benefit the people, not to promote individual liberty, freedom, and independence, not to support the principles of the Declaration of Independence, but for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to increase the power of government. Supreme Court decisions primarily have been made with the intention of increasing the power of government. And over the years, what has happened is that the Constitution's principles have been destroyed. The Constitution has been destroyed for no other purpose than to increase the power of government and to enslave the American people. Now, I'm going to give you another example here of the lies that are told to us daily in the media, in which no one, conservative pundit, liberal pundit, statist, any of them, none of them have bothered to elucidate or explain. The lies that we are fed daily, that each of us, most of us, except those who listen to this program, regurgitate without thought because a moderator or anchor, so-called, on television has said so, or a government official has said so, or a school teacher has said so, or a professor has said so, or it's written in a newspaper and we don't question it. Things which are lies, which if we looked, we could prove that they were lies. The unemployment rate. We are told ad nauseum that the unemployment rate has now gone down from 9.6% to 8.5%, and we all accept that without question. That's a lie. And all you have to do is look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I'm going to do that right now. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is a branch of government. I am not talking about information from a think tank. I am not talking about some private group. I'm talking about the individuals who actually put out these statistics. When the government says our unemployment rate is 8.5%, it gets that number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And those are the numbers that we're going to be looking at to show you how they manipulate things in order to fool the American people. Let's look at just one quick thing to show you the lies that are told to us. Now, why is it in the interest of the government at this time, or at least certain members of the government, to tell us that the unemployment rate has dropped to 8.5%? Of course, that's much higher than it used to be, but the trend is positive, so they say, and therefore the idea is that the government programs which enslave the people are actually benefiting the nation because the unemployment rate has come down more than a full percent since the implementation of these government programs. That is what they would have you believe. But let's look at one statistic right off the bat before we go into more detail. In 2007, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 146 million Americans employed. Today, as of December 2011, there are 140 million Americans employed. Well, that's interesting. I mean, 140 million is less than 146 million. Did the population of the United States go down in the last 5 or 6 years? Well, no. No, the population of the United States has not gone down. All right. Then what has actually, how is it that the unemployment rate has gone down? It's simply because of the way they calculate things in order to make things look good for the American people, lies spewed out by the government. So they tell us today, and every Democrat will tell you this, and of course Republicans are no better, but they say that Barack Obama has created 3 million jobs, which they admit is not fantastic, but at least in the right a trend in the right direction. But if Barack Obama created 3 million more jobs, why when he took over as a presidency in 2009 in January, there were 140 million jobs. By the end of 2009, his first year in office, there were 139,877,000 jobs. and now there are 140,790,000 jobs. And so under his reign, we have only less than 900,000, or about 900,000 jobs created. So where'd the 3 million number come from? Well, they just kind of make that up. But let's take a look at the real unemployment statistics if we use government numbers, but using rational calculations, rational mathematics versus the way they want us to do it. So if we look at the number of potential, if we look at the number of those that can be employed for work, that number has gone from 231 million to 240 to 150 to 162 million. Using, if it has gone from, excuse me, it's all scribbled here in my paper. In 2007, there were 231 million potential individuals capable of working, 231 million. Today, there are 240 million capable of working, so a 9 million person increase. However, according to government, the way government does things, the actual number, the number of people that are in the workforce has only gone up by 900,000. So even though there are 9 million people more potentially able to work, the workforce increase has only been actually, according to 750,000. Why is that? Because if you've never had a job, let's say you're a new college graduate and you cannot get a job, if you've never had a job and cannot get a job, you're not counted in the workforce. If you've had a job but have been out of a job for a year, or you have stopped looking for a job, you are no longer counted in the workforce. So you have all these millions of people, 9 million people, more than they admit to have, which are not counted in the workforce, even though they're essentially unemployed. If you look at the calculation, if you look at the real calculations, if you took the government numbers, those people who can be employed, and you add but who have never been employed or have been out of work for a year, even though they wish to be employed, and you add that to the real number, then what is the real rate of unemployment? Well, I did those calculations, and based upon those calculations, using government statistics and not discarding these individuals as if they don't exist, because what the government has done, it has tossed out college graduates who've never had a job, pretending they never existed, individuals who've been out of work for a year or who no longer are seeking jobs, even though they would like to work. The government says those people do not exist. That is government thinking. Using the Bureau of Labor Statistics' own methodology, what we have is this, that in the year 2007, the unemployment rate, using the methodology of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate was 4.7%. Using those same methodology, but instead of disappearing 9 million people, we come back to the Earth, the planet Earth, come back to reality, and we say these are people who want to have jobs, who had jobs at one time but have been out of work for a year, or all of these individuals who are of working age, college graduates and others who want to work, who need to earn a living but cannot find a job and have never had a job, therefore do not count if we add those people in, as we ought to. And if we do that, so if we make these invisible people reappear, this is what we have. In the year 2007, the unemployment rate is 4.7%. In 2008, it is 6.3%. In 2009, it is 11%. In 2010, it is 13%. And in 2011, it is 13%. That is the improvement of Barack Obama. the unemployment rate has not actually gone up. It has stayed steady at 13%. Not the 8.5%, not the 8.5% that the government says, but in reality, which I think we all understand is the true number, the true percentage rate, 13% of the population is unemployed. Catastrophic. Not only not going down, but going up. When Barack Obama, in his first year of presidency, 2009, by the end of the first year of presidency, the unemployment rate was 11%. Now, entering the fourth year of presidency, it is unemployment rate of 13%. Not only not a decrease, but one of the highest rates, one of the highest rates, if not the highest rates, since the Great Depression. One more thing for you Republican fans, what you will notice is that the peak of employment in United States history was in the last year of George Bush's presidency, 146 million. I am certainly not a friend of George Bush or a fan of George Bush, but for you Republicans, that in his sixth year of his presidency we had 146 million. That the unemployment rate started to go up, coincidentally, interestingly enough, when the Democrats took over the House and the Senate in the year 2007. The employment rate had been in a steady upward ascent all through the Bill Clinton years, all through the first 6 years of the Bush presidency. But when the Democrats took over in 2007, even though George Bush was still president, 2007 was the first year of the Democrats taking the House, controlling both the House and the Senate. You must remember under Bill Clinton that during a period of time, the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, or at least the House. But in 2007 was the first year in 10 years or so that the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. And it was at that point exactly that unemployment rate started to go up and the employment numbers started to go down for the first time since the Great Depression, in which the number of employed actually began to decrease. So in 2006 was the highest employment ever in the United States, 146 million. Once the Democrats took power in 2007, the number went from 146 million to the number that it went down to 138 million, and is now at 140,790,000. So therefore, that we've lost over 5 million jobs since the Democrats took power. Since Barack Obama's taken power, the increase has been 700,000 jobs from the low. So today we still have 6 million less jobs than in 2007, and yet they say that since Barack Obama came in which we can only see 700,000 jobs increased, they're saying 3 million jobs. The bottom line is that since the Democrats took power, there are 6 million less jobs now than there were in 2006. But so the real unemployment rate, not allowing to get away with manipulating the statistics, the real rate of unemployment is 13%. We are told it is 8.5% and getting better, when actually it is 13%, which is getting to Great Depression levels. We're being lied to continuously. All the evidence is there. All the facts are there. All the truth is there. All you need to do is look for it. I look for it because I know the government lies, and therefore anything that they say I know is a lie. And then I look for the information to prove the lie for you, the listening audience, so that you yourselves can look for the truth, so that you yourselves are able to learn what the truth is and refute all the garbage spewed out to us from the system of public education, from the media, from the government. We'll be back after this short commercial break. 7 and KRV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. 710 KRB Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. We're here to teach the choir how to sing. Everything that you hear from the government and politicians, system of public education, and the media is a lie until proven otherwise. And we are here to prove it. The Constitution was created to constrain government because our founding fathers knew the character of politicians. If they thought that politicians were angels and saints, there would not be any need for a constitution. Our founding fathers grew up in a world of the divine right of kings. They didn't understand the purpose of that, how someone could be born to rule others, and how those yet to be born were either destined to rule, and those yet to be born were condemned to be ruled by those aristocrats. We have Scott, 7 that KRB Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. What's your comment, Scott?
Good afternoon, Doctor. I watched both the State of the Union address by President Obama, and I watched all the debates. And,
well, you have an iron gut.
Yes, sir. But I only have a public education. You can't blame me for that. I got a couple of years of junior college, but I can think for myself. And Barack Obama seemed nothing more to me than a high-pressured salesman trying to sell me something during his entire speech.
Well, that's what all politicians are, isn't it, essentially? High-pressure salesmen trying to get you to buy their product.
It seemed like he was lying to me during a lot of the discussion. I mean, as far as General Motors go, they opened as an IPO at 35, and they're down to 24 right now. They haven't had much growth. When you can think about Google, who opened at 85, and usually run between 400 and 500 after a couple of months. But he lies to us about Congress. If he sends them a bill to stop Congress and politicians from inside trading, making all these millions of dollars off Wall Street, when they're making a scapegoat out of Martha Stewart and try to burn us with Martha Stewart, and they're doing the same thing. And he's saying, well, you go ahead and bring us a bill, and I'll be the first one to sign it. And I didn't hear too much clapping after that one, but, it's all like we're all being bought out. Like the American people, their entire public system of learning the way to live life in this country has become so deteriorated that you got 4 out of the last 4 callers that called Sergio said they would vote for Newt Gingrich, who is one of the biggest hypocrite, liar politicians, big businessman on the market.
I think you're being too kind to Newt Gingrich. He's far worse than that. Remember, Newt Gingrich sits on the park bench with Nancy Pelosi in a commercial, both saying that humankind actually controls the climate. Newt Gingrich is really no more than Barack Obama. He just says what he thinks the people want to hear so he can get elected, because Newt Gingrich has no other reason to exist than to be president. He wants to be president the same way somebody wants to be king, not because they want to do good, but because they want the power that goes along with it. So I'm gonna, Scott, I'm gonna tell you something. I had come to believe that the Republican voter was more intelligent and really had the good of the nation and constitutional principles at heart, and were electing people who betrayed them, whether it was a George Bush or a Richard Nixon or a Newt Gingrich, that the Republican voters were people that really wanted constitutional government and elected people they thought would give them constitutional government, but in the end, they turned out to be politicians, Democrats wearing Republican clothing, and betrayed the principles of the Constitution and the voters. But I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, I'm starting to come to the belief that the Republican voter is actually as ignorant as the Democrat voter, and even more ignorant in that the Democrat voter wants to be a peon. The Democrat voter wants to be on welfare, wants to be unemployed, wants to be taken care of, and they elect people that'll do that. And so when they elect Barack Obama, the Democrat says, we don't want to work, we want someone else to work for us. We don't want to be educated. We want the educated to work for us. We want to be able to be on welfare and have all these kids without being married. We want to be able to be unemployment. We want to be on welfare, and we're going to elect somebody that keeps us, that does that for us. So they elect Barack Obama. The Republicans aren't even as intelligent as that. The Republicans are out there. They don't know what the heck they want to do. The fact of the matter is they are as ignorant as the Democrats, but even less pragmatic, let's say. And that is why the Republicans keep getting shellacked, even when they're in power. To me, it's just amazing that anybody could vote for Newt Gingrich. The guy has shown himself to be the consummate liar, the consummate charlatan, the consummate snake oil salesman.
Yeah, and when I was watching the debates, one thing I noticed was all three were on each other, and the only one that was sitting there that was not getting attacked and had to defend himself was Ron Paul, because he's the only one that speaks the truth, and they see right to him, and they don't really want to get involved with him because he knows that he can show them straight out to the American public what type of liars the other three are, and how they'll be no different than Barack Obama, and things may not get any worse, but they're not going to get better, and they're not going to be run by the Constitution. Like you said, they're going to be run by a king, and they're going to try to make this a full-on socialized parliament of socialism that we see in England.
The collusion of government and the media is no more aptly shown than in these debates. The only individual, as you have noted, on the stage that is in any way legitimate and really interesting to listen to is Ron Paul. All the others, if you closed your eyes, well, if you read the transcript, if you read the transcript, you don't listen to them, you don't see them, but if you read the transcript of what they're saying, other than calling each other's names by name, if you looked at their positions and their statements and their policy positions, you couldn't distinguish between Gingrich, Romney, Santorum, or any of the others. They all are exactly the same. However, you know and I know that if we read the positions of Ron Paul without knowing it was Ron Paul, we know it's him. And to me, if I'm a legitimate moderator and all these individuals are not, it doesn't matter if it's Fox News or CNN, they're all drones, they're all Humpty Dumptys, they don't know anything. You would think that as a moderator, since the only person there that has anything substantial to say, anything that is really important, is Ron Paul, and he's the one that they don't ask questions to. And I'll tell you, and the reason is, one of the reasons is that Ron Paul is smarter than the moderator. And these moderators, are, whether it's Bear or whether it's Wolf Blitz or anybody else, any of these individuals, they think they're really smart. Okay? They really think they're geniuses. They're arrogant. But really, they're ignorant and stupid. And so, therefore, they have to talk. The only people they really want to converse with are the Romneys and the Gingriches and the Santorums and the Paulentis and all of those, because they're as ignorant and stupid as the moderator. If the moderator talks to a Ron Paul makes the moderator look like an idiot. And so they don't want to ask him questions because he is so much smarter and so much more principled than they are that the moderator looks bad. So it's really a rigged system. You might as well have an election in which the Duke of one castle is debating the Duke of another castle over who should be king. That's about what this is. That's the sense that this makes. And the Democrats are one family of aristocrats, and the Republicans are another family of aristocrats. And the most important thing for them is that the aristocratic party stay in power. That is why the Republicans actually attack Ron Paul more than they attack Barack Obama. Anything else?
Yeah, when I was watching the debate, it almost seemed like it was just a two-man race, and the two guys they had in there were nothing more than the most commercialized, paid-off sellouts that you could pick out of the four. And they would go from, you're right to Ron Paul was always seemed to be the fourth man, and when they got on him and he started answering questions, you could tell everybody else there was didn't know what was going on. He was so far above them as intelligent-wise, but also the way he could handle himself with not being intimidated by anything, because nobody had anything they can intimidate him with, because he was the smartest guy. I mean, it was
exactly right.
To see who the best man was. That's
right. Newt Gingrich pulls out something about Santorum and Romney. Romney pulls out something about Newt Gingrich and Santorum. It goes round and around and around, in a game of gotcha. They can't do that to Ron Paul. There's nothing they can get him on. All they can do is attack him on his principles, and they don't agree with his principles about limited government and stopping his foreign adventurism. But they can only be a disagreement on his principles. They cannot get him as they get each other on flip-flopping and wavering and holding one position one day and then on the other day and being shown to be hypocrites. They can't do that with Ron Paul. All they can do is say that they don't agree with his principles, but then they have to debate on principles, and they're unprepared to do that. Okay.
I was really amazed when he put everybody right in their place when he said, well, you know, that area of water over there by Iran that's occupied, being occupied by Iran, well, we were already in there occupying it with our battleships way before Iran was, and we're the ones that really showed the fight in the channel there. We're the ones that have shown the power.
The United States has a very, very long history, whether it's the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Iraqi War. The United States has a very, very long history in being able to maneuver the other side into doing something which makes it appear that they're aggressors, and the way we do it is by being the aggressor ourselves, but not really firing the first shot. The American people are kept in the dark by the media and our politicians, and then when Iran fires the first shot, we will portray them as the aggressor when in fact it is the United States that is the real aggressor. But the United States has a long, sordid history in involving itself in wars for imperialist reasons by maneuvering the other side into making a move which makes it appear that they are the belligerents. And it's a very sad commentary, but that's what our government needs to do in a democracy in order to try to fool the American people into going to war against other nations. Okay, Scott, thanks a lot. I'm going to move on to another topic here. Last week was the 37th or 38th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. I'm going to discuss that decision now because it's a perfect example of the way government functions and the way politicians function. You know, the way the abortion issue is portrayed in the media and by our politicians, they make it seem that it is a disagreement between conflicting but legitimate ideologies. That the anti-abortion side is tethered in spiritual and religious doctrine, whereas the pro-choice side is grounded in women's rights movement. The argument is reduced to personal convictions rather than objective criteria, making it appear as a quarrel between equal but opposite antagonists with different but legitimate points of view. Now, I, of course, side with the pro-life anti-abortion side, but one of the problems that they have, they're right, of course, but in how they tie themselves to religious doctrine. There's really no problem with that, but it allows the other side to make it appear that it is a conflict between religion and the others who are more secular, and that the religious people are perfectly willing to enslave women because of religious doctrine and allow the enslavement of women based on that. And that is not the case at all. In looking at the abortion issue objectively, it is clear that it is not a debate between equals but opposites, but a debate between those who tell the truth and those who lie. Let's look at all the premises of the pro-choice, pro-abortion movement. They say that the undelivered infant is part of the mother. They say that prior to a certain gestational age, the undelivered infant is not completely human. They say the undelivered infant can be sacrificed if the infant is a product of rape or incest. They say that the undelivered infant can be sacrificed if the pregnancy endangers the health or life of the mother. These assertions are completely false, and they are the pillars, and they are all the pillars of the pro-choice movement. The fact is, the undelivered infant is not part of the mother. The mother is born with all of her organs. An infant in the uterus is not one of them. The mother's blood supply and the infant's blood supply are completely separated while the infant is in the uterus. The infant has its own unique genetic makeup and blood type, completely independent of the mother's. The infant has its own organs separate from the mother, and the infant responds to stimulus independently of the mother. Modern science has proven that all the necessary components creating a human being are in place at the moment of conception. As we are human post-delivery, we are just as human before delivery. Those alive today would not exist if they had been terminated at any stage after conception. You must understand that if you are human now, you were human then. And if it was a non-human that was eliminated at 12 or 16 weeks gestation, then where would your life be today? Non-existent. On the rape and incest issue, the infant conceived as a consequence of rape or incest is innocent of any wrongdoing. Society will not even execute the perpetrator of rape or incest, but is perfectly willing, apparently, to execute the completely innocent party. And finally, there do not exist any health conditions whatsoever in the pregnant woman which require the intentional killing of the undelivered infant. An earlier than term delivery may be necessary, but the intentional killing of the infant is never required. I'm going to add one more thing on the human rights issue that these individuals seem to think is part of the pro-choice movement, a woman's right to choose. The infant is a human being that has been denied its right to the debate. And in countries which allow abortion, that is found that the majority of those aborted are women, girls. Why? Because in many, if not most societies, if not all societies, the general belief is that men are more valuable to the parent or parents than the child. Therefore, the abortion results in the killing of millions more girl babies than boy babies. And how does that mesh with the idea that this is a women's rights issue? More, in fact, polls have shown that more men support abortion than women. And I wonder why that is. Okay. Now, since every argument used by the pro-choice movement is a lie, then the Roe v. Wade decision, which granted the right of abortion on demand in the United States, must also be based on lies. And it is based on lies, and we're going to go through those lies now. The Roe v. Wade decision, initiated by a single woman, pregnant Roe, who brought a class action lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the Texas criminal abortion laws, which criminalized abortion. We must understand the majority of politicians favor a pro-choice agenda, not because they believe in the issue particularly, but pro-choice agenda meshes with the proclivity of politicians favoring big government, all government, lust for power over life and death. To be granting abortion gives them the power of life and death. Majority of Americans, however, are opposed to unlimited abortion on demand. And so therefore, it required a collusion between government and the courts and a relatively small group of very belligerent, vociferous advocates of abortion, which call themselves collectively the pro-choice movement. Therefore, what was done in order to avoid the legislative process, because the legislative process would not have allowed abortion to be legalized, it required the assertion that a legislation was unnecessary because hidden within the Constitution itself, never before noted for 2 centuries, was a constitutional right to abortion. The Congress and President were therefore bypassed, and the authority to allow or legalize abortion on demand was given to the Supreme Court. Now, too many of us believe that the courts are independent of popular will because, and therefore make decisions based upon the law, what's constitutional. But the fact of the matter is that the judges are selected by politicians, and the views of the judges selected will coincide with the politicians doing the appointing. So therefore, if you look at the decision by the Supreme Court, we will find many discrepancies and things which are not true and which are actually false. The Supreme Court prefaces their decision stating, this is in the decision, our task, referring to the Supreme Court, our task, of course, is to resolve the issue by constitutional measurement, free of emotion and of predilection. But then proceed to say, we forthwith acknowledge our awareness of the sensitive and emotional nature of the abortion controversy, of the vigorous opposing views, and of the deep and seemingly absolute convictions that the subject inspires. Continuing with what they said, one's philosophy, we have to go to a break, complete waste of time break, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. We'll return after this pause for a few minutes, and we will go back to the Roe v. Wade decision and all the phony premises that allowed that decision to go through. Be back after this short break. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. We're back. 710 KRV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone, streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. We are discussing the Roe v. Wade decision, and we're going through the lies that the decision consists entirely of, and because they already had decided to allow this murder to occur and then work backwards to justify it. We're going through the decision. We had just started with it. The Supreme Court makes a statement on objectivity, but then they state in the decision, we forthwith acknowledge our awareness of the sensitive and emotional nature of the abortion controversy, of the vigorous opposing views, and of the deep and seemingly absolute convictions that the subject inspires. One's philosophy, one's experiences, one's exposure to the raw edges of human existence, One's attitude towards life and family and their values are all likely to influence and to color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion. In addition, they go on. In addition, population growth, pollution, poverty, and racial overtones tend to complicate and not to simplify the problem. End quote. These comments are devoid of any valid objective foundation, substituting in its stead the subjective varying perceptions of population growth, pollution, poverty, and racial overtones, which are neither universal nor constant. These ever-changing perceptions are viewed through the prisms of narrowly drawn time frames. They are redefined from age to age, from country to country, and even from person to person. The Constitution, on the other hand, was intended as a permanent architecture of governance, establishing a constant relationship between the people and the government, unchanging, irrespective of advances in civilization, all the altering of transitory conditions and perceptions in which human beings live. This court is openly admitting its intention to sacrifice the founding principles of the nation to fulfill its own agenda. The premises in the Roe v. Wade decision are the premises within the decision distort historical perspectives. They assert that the fetus for a time is not human. They assert the mother has a right to kill the undelivered infant. They assert the undelivered infant can be killed on the grounds of justifiable homicide, and they make up meanings to words. The decision states, quote, "The Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing views, and the accident of our finding certain opinions natural and familiar or novel, and even shocking, ought not to conclude our judgment upon the question whether statutes embodying them conflict with the Constitution of the United States," end quote. Though stated as a matter of fact, that is actually a completely false statement. The Constitution was formulated by those with very similar philosophical positions to preserve and maintain the nation on the same ideological path forever. The Constitution exists specifically to defend the nation from fundamentally differing views. Certainly, those that believed in the creed of the divine right of kings would not agree to the basis of the Constitution, and this disagreement was the reason of the Revolutionary War. Today, we recognize many societies in disagreement with the philosophical foundation of the Constitution. Yet the court makes its statement as if it were to be taken for granted that the court taken for granted that this is a statement that is accurate. The court then uses this false premise to build a completely invalid argument dependent on an interpretation of the Constitution which does not exist. The decision continues, quote, "It perhaps is not generally appreciated that the restrictive criminal abortion laws in effect in a majority of states today are of relatively recent vintage." The decision then goes on, quote, "We are also told abortion was practiced in Greek times as well as in the Roman era, and that it was resorted to without scruple. Greek and Roman law afforded little protection to the unborn," end quote. Of what relevance are outdated practices and beliefs based upon mistaken notions in the light of present-day knowledge? The court continues, quote, "Thus it has been argued that a state's real concern in enacting a criminal abortion law was to protect the pregnant woman, that is, to restrain her from submitting to a procedure that placed her life in serious jeopardy. They claim that most state laws were designed solely to protect the woman," end quote. This postures the ludicrous notion that the ban on abortion was to protect the health and safety of the mother. As operations go, abortion performed in a proper environment is among the simplest and least risky of all operative procedures. If it were true that concern for the mother's health was paramount, then the logical solution would have been not to ban abortions, but to legalize abortions, thus permitting this simple procedure be performed in a proper hospital environment by competent physicians. That this was not the case illustrates that the basis of the prohibition on abortion was a consequence of concerns not as regards a mother's health, but instead intended to prevent the killing of the in utero infant. Then the court places the Hippocratic Oath into evidence, quoting, "I will not give to a woman an abortive remedy." They quote from the oath itself, end quote. Then the court seeks to refute the oath by citing an excerpt from Dr. Edelstein's book, Ancient Medicine, in which Edelstein says, quoting, "The oath originated in a group representing only a small segment of Greek opinion, and that it certainly was not accepted by all ancient physicians," end quote. Edelstein is making a quantitative, not a qualitative statement, and not addressing the validity of the oath, only that it was adhered to by a minority of physicians at the time. Truth, however, is not bound to time frames or popularity. A custom or tradition maintained for 1,000 years does not add an iota of value to its relative worth, nor does a belief's relative popularity alter its veracity. The moment truth is discovered, instantaneously, a lifetime of falsehood vaporizes. The earth is not the center of the solar system, despite being believed so for hundreds of years. Legitimacy is not granted to those societies that practice slavery, serfdom, and subjugation of women simply by their having been endured for greater periods of time than those societies banning such loathsome practices. Many popular beliefs have been frequently found to be erroneous. Nevertheless, the court applies its distortions to achieve its erroneous conclusion. The court postures many faulty and antiquated concepts. For example, the court entertains as legitimate the now scientifically discarded concept of quickening. Quickening is the term denoting the first recognizable movement of the fetus through observation of the mother's abdomen, appearing usually from the 16th to the 18th week of pregnancy, which was once considered the only reliable evidence of the first signs of human life. Modern science and imaging techniques now provide absolute proof that human life occurs far earlier than 16 weeks. Nevertheless, the court utilizes this now meaningless term, writing, and I'm quoting, "It is undisputed that at common law, abortion performed before quickening was not an indictable offense," end quote. The court resorts to ancient mysticisms, discarded fallacies, and opinions, such as, quoting, "There has always been a strong support for the view of life that it does not begin until live birth. This was the belief of the Stoics." The court also says, quoting, "The Aristotelian theory of mediate animation, where the soul is incorporated at some unknown time after conception, that held sway throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe," end quote. And, quoting, "The view of life beginning at conception have substantial problems for a precise definition of this view are posed, however, by new embryological data that purport to indicate that conception is a process over time rather than an event," end quote. This is completely absurd. All of these are meaningless opinions without any scientific foundation, and in the light of present-day knowledge, patently absurd. The court refers to non-existent rights, quoting, "This right of privacy is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. We therefore conclude that the right of personal privacy includes the abortion decision," end quote. They continue, quoting, "State criminal abortion laws that accept from criminality only a life-saving procedure on the mother's behalf without regard to the stage of her pregnancy and other interests involved violate the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which protects against the right to privacy, including a woman's qualified right to terminate her pregnancy, end quote. The so-called right to privacy was achieved in the case of Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. The majority opinion, written by William O. Douglas, stated, and though freely admitting that the phrase the right to privacy does not actually exist in the Constitution, William O. Douglas says in his decision, quoting, "The modern interpretation of the Bill of Rights permits an extension of delineated rights originating from penumbras formed by emanations from those guarantees of rights that help give them life and substance. Various guarantees create zones of privacy," end quote. The exact meaning of penumbra is the lighter shade of a shadow that found at the periphery of the shadow. An emanation is an invisible ray emitted from a source. So technically, the penumbras formed by emanations describes the lighter part of a shadow, somehow created by invisible rays. How shadows can be formed from invisible rays is yet to be explained. Remarkably, after 170 years, something unperceived, heretofore invisible, and apparently non-existent can now be discerned by a highly select group of Supreme Court justices whose vision, augmented by a fevered imagination, allowed perception of the imperceptible. The fact is that the absolute right to privacy is omitted purposefully. There cannot be an absolute right to privacy, for that would allow a murder committed in the privacy of one's home to be insulated from the law. And in fact, the Constitution refers to this issue directly. Amendment 4 in the Bill of Rights says, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation." The court attempts, and so it shows that the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, effects, and papers and effects is not absolute. It can be overturned by oath or affirmation, so it is not an absolute right, and the Constitution specifically says so. The court attempts to reclassify murder as justifiable homicide. The court admits it cannot determine when human life begins, but this is what they write. We quote, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary at this point in the development of man's knowledge is not in a position to speculate as to the answer," end quote. But despite the court's self-acknowledged ignorance, it is not deterred from deciding when life can be ended, manufacturing distinctions by assigning arbitrarily drawn degrees of value to the in utero infant. The medical designation of trimesters is arbitrarily drawn and utilized inappropriately by the non-physicians constituting the court. The court writes in its decision, I quote, "For the stage prior to approximately the end of the first trimester, the abortion decision and its effectuation must be left to the medical judgment of the pregnant woman's attending physician." End quote. The court continues, and I quote, "With respect to the state's important and legitimate interest in the health of the mother, the compelling point in the light of present medical knowledge is at approximately the end of the first trimester. This is so because of the now established medical fact that until the end of the first trimester, mortality in abortion may be less than mortality in normal childbirth." End quote. This is patently nonsensical, as today no such medical data exists. It strains credibility that this is the sole criterion the court uses, justifying unlimited abortion on demand in the first 13 weeks of gestation. This criterion could logically justify the killing of any other human being, as there is an infinitesimal potential risk that each human being poses to every other human being. It places the life of the mother arbitrarily as more worthy than the life of the infant without due process. The court treats life of the in utero infant in the first 13 weeks of gestation as irrelevant. Who doubts that pregnancy is a continuum of the same being? To use this arbitrarily drawn designation of trimesters to determine the legitimate guidelines for the commission of an abortion is without merit. What is the intrinsic difference between an in utero infant of 13 weeks and 13 weeks and 1 day? Is the infant less human and less worthy of life by lacking a single day of development? Normal, viable infants are routinely delivered prior to full-term gestation. How is the infant a human being at delivery, but less so a single moment prior to delivery? Any woman, or for that matter, any rational human being, would never ascribe to the notion that the infant at 40 weeks is somehow different from the one at 13 weeks gestation. Yet that infant is under varying degrees of threat of losing its life based solely on its position in the time frame of pregnancy. The court paints itself once again into a corner. If the undelivered infant in the first 13 weeks is distinct from the infant later in gestation, then what is it after 13 weeks? By pursuing this line of reasoning, the court is forced to recognize the eventual viability of an obviously human infant at some point during pregnancy and chooses arbitrarily the third trimester, writing in its decision, and I quote, "For the stage subsequent to viability, the state, in promoting its interest in the potentiality of human life..."
This is the 5-minute news service on Fox News.
May, if it chooses, regulate and even proscribe abortion, but ultimately remains undeterred in its pursuit of an agenda. That was the end quote. But ultimately remains undeterred in its pursuit of an agenda, permitting the killing of the infant at any stage of pregnancy by then tossing in the proverbial kitchen sink into its decision, shifting the balance between the conflicting desires of the mother and baby completely to the mother's side by adding this phrase, and I quote, "except where necessary in appropriate medical judgment for the preservation of the life or health of the mother," end quote. This is by far the most frequently offered excuse justifying abortion upon demand, but is simultaneously the most fallacious and insidious. For upon this rationale, every attempt to limit abortion on demand is struck down by the courts. Consider this fact: there are no illnesses in the pregnant woman that require the intentional killing of the in utero infant. Though there are conditions occurring during pregnancy which may require an earlier than term delivery, the intentional killing of the in utero infant is never, ever required to preserve the health of the mother. In fact, the most commonly diagnosed illness in the mother validating abortion is not a physical one by a diagnosis of psychological stress. There do not exist any objective tests certifying psychological illness, and thus the subjective symptoms are easy to fake on the part of the patient, and the diagnosis is easy to falsify by the physician abortionist. The court seeks to buttress its fallacious arguments by demonizing children and childbirth, and I quote, "The detriment that the state would impose upon the pregnant woman by denying this choice altogether is apparent. Maternity or additional offspring may force upon the woman a distressful life and future. Psychological harm may be imminent. Mental and physical health may be taxed by child care. There is also the distress for all concerned associated with the unwanted child, and there is the problem of bringing a child into a family already unable, psychologically and otherwise, to care for it. All these are factors the woman and her responsible physician necessarily will consider in consultation," end quote. This same rationale justifying the killing of the in utero infant on the basis of convenience could be used to terminate a child's life even after delivery. It's of notable interest the little importance the court grants the life of a child relative to the far greater importance granted a mother's convenience. The court relies on the perversion of language to get its way. Abortion is the termination of any process prior to its completion. Abortion of pregnancy is not the same as the abortion of life. The abortion of life is the premature termination of life. The abortion of pregnancy is the premature termination of pregnancy, which can be accomplished with the delivery of a viable infant. Achieving the abortion of pregnancy without the necessity of killing the in utero infant threatened the very linchpin of the Roe v. Wade decision, whose true purpose is not the termination of pregnancy, but the killing of the infant. The court overcame this obstacle through altering the definition of abortion. The court's contrived new definition of abortion is, and I quote, the termination of human pregnancy with an intention other than to produce a live birth, end quote. This is a meaningless and fictitious definition. The court then perverts the definition of an infant. Having succeeded in applying an erroneous meaning to the term abortion, the court proceeded to alter the definition of an infant. The Constitution of the United States affords protection to human life in the 5th and 14th Amendments, stating, and I quote, nor shall any person be deprived of life without due process of law, end quote. The court overcomes this obstacle by stating, and I quote, all this together persuades us that the word person, as used in the 14th Amendment, does not include the unborn. In short, the unborn have never been recognized in the law as persons in the whole sense, end quote. Such an unethical interpretation of the Constitution is nothing new for the Supreme Court, for a similar conclusion is found in another Supreme Court decision, and I quote, the question before us is whether this class of persons described are constituent members of this sovereignty. We think they are not, and they are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States, end quote. These are the words used in the majority opinion in the Dred Scott decision of 1857 in reference to black slaves' constitutional standing. They had none, according to the decision, much the same as the in utero infant now has none. The Dred Scott decision affirmed the legality of slavery, not its legitimacy. The Roe v. Wade decision affirmed the legality of abortion, not its legitimacy. The same rationale was utilized in the Nuremberg laws of 1935, denying German Jews the right of citizenship in Germany. This ruling led to the Holocaust, the legalized homicide of 6 million Jews. The Roe v. Wade decision is merely a pretext of concealing the court's true intention. It has resulted in the homicide of 50 million innocent, undelivered infants. Be back after the short commercial break. 7 and KRV Talkback with Dr. Lawrence Gelman. (7:10) Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, teaching the choir how to sing. So what can we say about the Roe v. Wade decision and the Supreme Court in general? In the Roe v. Wade decision, the court created non-existent rights while simultaneously denying existing rights, extrapolates conclusions based upon false premises, admits as evidence mysticisms, myths, superstitions, notions, and beliefs long discarded, and applies a faulty logic to draw its erroneous conclusions. There is not a single valid point justifying its position. Yet, under such tortured reasoning, was abortion on demand ratified. Unfortunately, legal decisions such as the Roe v. Wade decision, resulting in the killing of innocents, are not unique in the history of the world. The slaughter occasioned by the Nazis, communists, Turks, Hutus, were legally sanctioned by their courts, defended by useful dupes and collaborators in the government, media, and systems of education, lauded and applauded by much of their country's own populations, empowering the likes of Hitler of Germany, Stalin of the Soviet Union, Mao of Red China, Talat of Turkey, Kambanda of Rwanda, and now Barack Obama of the United States, and all those seeking to deny rights, enslave, oppress, and even commit genocide. We've witnessed it before. We are witnessing it today. Such ignorance is to be condemned. It's not a battle between the religious and the secular, but a battle between truth and falsehood, right and wrong, good and evil. The pro-choice movement is based upon lies, not in part, but in its entirety. Lies promulgated by liars, frauds, and dupes. It is based upon junk science and junk law. It is a movement promoting big government over the rights of the individual. It's a war in which most citizens are unaware as even being fought. Future generations will look upon us as in the same manner we look upon those who stood idly by while the mass killing of innocent human beings proceeded unabated, much to an everlasting shame. Such is the Roe v. Wade decision. Such is the Supreme Court. Such is our government, an object of shame. Now we have Jack, 7 and KRV, Talkback with Dr. Lawrence Gelman. What's your comment, please, Jack?
Dr. Gelman, as you speak, I'm convicted of one particular thing, and that is that you are referencing a culture of death, an overall worldview, a philosophy, if you will, that has taken over much of the world today, and at various times has taken over other parts of the world. You've mentioned, for instance, emanations from the penumbra. Emanations from the penumbra. It's this vague light between the dark and between the light. It's some emanation. It may be like a dark light. It's part of the occult. It's an occultic reference. And that indeed, when you start dealing with the occult, I'm looking at Nazi Germany. They were really big into the occult, and talk about a culture of death. You know, I was checking out someone like Ceausescu of Romania, and talk about a culture of death. The people, the population in Romania prior to Ceausescu finally being machine gunned on a wall along with his wife, the population was going down. People were starving and so forth and so on. That was a culture of death. And in order to try to get around that, Ceausescu, the good socialist, outlawed abortion. Okay. But nevertheless, it didn't do any good. Women were dying in childbirth, starving to death, and so forth and so on. Wherever you look, the Soviet Union, you look at socialism, wherever you look, you see a culture of death, and it's part and parcel of big government. Did you know that one of the largest government buildings in the world was in communist Romania? The largest government building in the world. I just checked it out on the internet. It's massive.
Yes, but I mean, remember, it is the trappings of office and the appearance of the structures meant to cow the people. For example, if you look at some of these Nazi documentaries, and they have Hitler's plan for Berlin, he was going to make it the center of the world, and the architecture that is used, isn't it interesting how similar that architecture is to the architecture of Washington, D.C.? It is nothing unusual for the aristocracy or the class of aristocrats and kings and queens to create edifices to awe the people by the size of it, and to make the people feel that the inhabitants of those structures, whether it be cathedrals or whether it be palaces that there was something that they were definitely of a different type of human being, the class of those destined to rule. You know, Jack, I know you often, when you call this program, you talk about the one-worlders and the conspiracies, but I was thinking about that, and you know that in the Middle Ages, and even today, of course, you have these aristocratic classes. Now, those aristocratic classes, whether it was the emperors and kings and queens of Germany, of Persia, of England, whatever, they are often at war with each other. But they all believed in the same principle of the divine right of kings. It didn't matter if you were the emperor of China or the king of England, even if they never knew each other or never spoke to each other or even knew of each other's existence, they all believed in the divine right of some people to control the lives of others, the divine right of kings. Now, right now in Davos, Switzerland, you have the same groupings of individuals which were no different than when the aristocrats got together in the Middle Ages to salute each other and reaffirm their right to dictate life and death over their subjects. It is a psychological conspiracy. It is not that they all get together and decide among themselves, because oftentimes the aristocrats, like in World War I, for example, they go to war with each other and kill each other. The conspiracy is a psychological conspiracy, in that there are those who really believe, that they are innately smarter than the average person and have the right and obligation and duty to control the lives of the masses. They firmly believe that, and that all those who are opposed to that belief, there's something wrong with them and they need to be controlled, either enslaved, incarcerated, or killed. And so the reason I bring this up is that those people who bring forth these conspiracy theories are laughed at simply because of the nature of the conspiracy, and it weakens our cause by presenting conspiracy theories. What we need to say is to clarify that there is a conspiracy of thought. There are those in the world who believe themselves superior innately, the Sarkozys, the Merkels, the Camerons, the Obamas, and all the rest, who believe themselves to be superior naturally, and therefore it is a meeting of like-minded people because they believe in a psychology that there are those who are innately superior to the masses.
I absolutely agree with you. I do believe it's not so much as an overt conspiracy as it is just a common way of thinking, arrogance and so forth and so on. This divine right of kings and so forth. You had mentioned the various edifices of government. Banks today, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more ostentatious. They've become the new edifice, the new symbol. And it's very interesting that one of the biggest cultures of death, Islam, should come over here to this country and destroy what it was, the World Trade Center. And what were they destroying? Their target was world trade. Their target was the economics of world economics. A bank, basically, the World Trade Center was a bank. A bank building. I think that wherever you look, you're seeing satanic forces at work, and I see the more we leave our Judeo-Christian roots, the more we leave God behind, the more we're going to see more of this. How do you feel about that, sir?
Well, yes, if you know, just as you're saying, the history of Islam, this long and sordid history of Islam, they documented their conquering by the building of a mosque, which is what they want to do in New York. That was their symbol. Look at the difference. Look at the difference between the symbols of the founding fathers and the symbols of Nazism, communism, and Islam. The symbols of Islam, Nazism, communism are gigantic edifices, large structures, control of the many by the few. Look at the symbols of founding fathers. the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, the people. There is the difference. And why is it that the symbol of Islam is the big mosque? The symbol of Nazism are these big structures. The symbol of Washington, D.C. are these gigantic marble, gray, square, monolithic edifices. It is to impose a sense of control over the population. Every time you walk past a mosque, it is to reinforce the idea somebody is watching you, somebody is controlling you. Every time you walk past a big government building, it is to instill into the people the idea that somebody is watching, somebody is controlling you. Notice how different that is than the Constitution of the United States or the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution, which says it is we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. We the people, not the clergy, not the aristocracy, not the king and queen, not the president, certainly not the government. And that is the difference. Our country was founded on a different kind of ideology, where the people were in charge of their own lives. Let me ask you, and look how we've been brainwashed, Jack. Look at how we've been brainwashed. We have a holiday for Abraham Lincoln, do we not? Whenever there is a poll as to the greatest American presidents, don't we often name the greatest fascists that ever existed? Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. I grew up, as I'm sure you did as well, as most people growing up in the system of public education, indoctrinated through the system of public education, made to believe that Abraham Lincoln was a great humanitarian, a great president, a great individual who saved the Union from the evil Southerners who wished to dismember the Union. What is the reality of that? I mean, what is your position on Abraham Lincoln?
My position on Abraham Lincoln is that he was a dictator. He was a statist. He was a mass murderer.
Mass murderer.
Indeed, he was. He even said himself that he was willing to kill every man, woman, and child in America to save the Union.
Aren't we taught in school about Sherman's grand march to the sea?
Amen.
Isn't that what we're taught?
Yes.
But what Sherman did is exactly what the Nazis did.
Right.
And do we look at the Nazis as great? Of course not. Sherman brought unrestricted warfare to the world. Sherman killed innocent men, women, and children, civilians. Sherman destroyed the South with the intention of starving them into submission. Yet, we look upon him as a great general, a great man. Ulysses S. Grant, who became President of the United States, was one of the great butchers of all time. His philosophy was, there are more of us than them, and therefore I can sacrifice tens of thousands of human soldiers in wave upon wave in order to get the South to exhaust its manpower and weaponry by plunging them in to the bodies of usually immigrant Northern soldiers. Yet in school, these barbarians and butchers and murderers, which destroyed the Constitution, Amen. Who themselves were fascists, who themselves were butchers in the same degree as the Nazis of concentration camps, as the Stalinists in Russia that had gulags. There's no difference between Sherman, Grant, and Lincoln than in Lenin, Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. Now, you know that there were many statues of Stalin and Lenin well into the 20th century. In Mao, there are statues and big posters today. The butcher of 60 million Chinese is still considered to be a hero in China, and of course among many of the American intelligentsia. So we have statues and portraits of Abraham Lincoln, but in effect, is Abraham Lincoln different than the imperialists of communist China, of communist Russia, of Nazi Germany.
No, there is no difference.
The only difference is that Lincoln won and the Nazis lost.
True. On the other hand, the communists won for about 75 years, and the communist Chinese are still winning. And in fact, the communist Chinese are making great inroads into this country. Particularly, they're making great inroads into south of our border.
Who created the principle of détente with the Soviet thugs? We did. Nixon and Kissinger. Did they not?
Yes.
Who took China, communist China, butcherer of millions, who took them from the swamps of poverty to where they are today, a economic powerhouse?
America did.
George Bush, Bill Clinton. Did they not? Is not the Chinese Army and Navy and military a direct result of America giving them modern technology? Is not the economic power of China directly due to American policy, in which now, Jack, I was thinking of a good, what do you call it, treasure hunt game?
Right.
Okay, a treasure hunt game, and this is it. You must find these products, but they cannot be made in China. Wouldn't that be interesting? Like a little parlor game when you have these little parties, and you give a list of goods, whether it's a printer or a cell phone or a souvenir, and you say, okay, you must find me a printer for my computer, but it cannot be made in China. You must find me a souvenir of the United States, but it cannot be made in China. Boy, that would be difficult to do.
Yes, it would. Very challenging. Right now, China has most favored nation status as a trading partner in the world, and that has been so for a number of years. Why is that?
Well, because China is the envy of every American politician, and of every European politician, because what the politicians of China are in the position that Barack Obama would like to be, that George Bush would have liked to have been, that Tony Blair would like to have been, that Cameron would like to be, that Merkel would like to be, that Sarkozy would like to be, complete control over the people. And so we are Barack Obama and whoever runs China today are kindred spirits, as Barack Obama is a kindred spirit with Hugo Chavez, as Barack Obama is a kindred spirit with Fidel Castro, because they are all, as we have mentioned earlier, of the same mindset, where they are born to control the lives of other people.
It's a dangerous game they're playing because China is a huge military force.
Well, let me tell you why they're doing it, okay? Because right now, and I know we're hearing this already, envy of the Chinese success, aren't we? Aren't you finding in our system of public education, in our media, in our political class, an envy of the success of the Chinese?
I see a little of that, yeah.
And it's growing, because I know that you and I are both old enough to remember when American economists in Harvard and Yale and all the rest were saying, look at the success of the central planning of the Soviet Union. We should be doing the same thing. And you're hearing that now, whispers from the halls of Congress, that maybe we should be doing the central planning of China. I have actually heard that in the doctor's lounge, of course, from doctors from third world countries that are used to that, but who are saying we should be like China and their 5-year plan. And I'm not kidding. I'm actually hearing that. To me, it shows you how ignorant some people can be when you're looking at China as the example, a totalitarian state, and saying that's what we need, central planning. And why is that? Because all of the academics in our universities, because all of our politicians and all of the media are all arrogant and ignorant and status and want control of the people, and they look to what China has done and making it seem as if their central planning is the reason for their success. when in actuality it is their central planning that has kept their people enslaved and prevented them from really achieving truly great success, because all the Chinese are doing is copying what the free individuals of the United States have created. The Chinese are coming up with nothing new. They're just good at copying what they have stolen from other nations of free people. Anything else to finish up?
Very, very briefly here, the mass murderers, Joe Stalin, Mao Zedong, and a few of the other communist mass murderers said that America, the capitalists, and they meant America, will sell us the rope that we use to hang them with, and we are selling it to them. Thank you.
Well, better yet, we're giving it to Barack Obama.
Amen.
Anyway, thanks for calling, Jack. Appreciate it. 710 KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. What you have heard here today, if someone can tell me if they've ever heard this anywhere outside of this program, I would be interested in hearing, because I'd like to be listening to that guy. So this is what you'll never hear this anywhere else. We're showing you the truth. This is the program that's going to teach you how to sing. It's not preaching to the choir. It is teaching the choir how to sing. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. Be back next week with more education to the listener.